Australia is now one of the wealthiest and most developed nations globally, boasting high levels of education, healthcare, and wages. Coupled with its easygoing lifestyle, this makes Australia one of the best places for a high standard of living. In fact, the quality of life here is so high that Australia's major cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide, regularly rank in the top 10 of the Global Livability Index. This index considers stability, healthcare, culture, environment, education, and infrastructure, showcasing how desirable these cities are. Australia also enjoys one of the world's highest life expectancies, with males averaging 81.3 years and females around 85.4. But it hasn't always been this way. Just over 150 years ago, in 1870, a newborn was only expected to live to around 34 years old. A few decades earlier, life for many Australians was a harsh struggle, marked by hard labor in an unforgiving environment. For much of its early history, Australia was governed as a penal colony for British convicts sent to build the first European settlements on the far side of the world. So how did Australia evolve from a place of punishment to a country where millions aspire to live today? The continent and country that is Australia has been inhabited for roughly 65,000 years, with the first humans migrating from Southeast Asia at the end of the last ice age. These early explorers were the first people to call Australia home, spreading across the vast land from the Torres Strait Islands in the north to Tasmania in the south. These were the ancestors of today's Aboriginal peoples, who eventually formed over 500 tribal groups, each with unique languages, territories, and rich cultural traditions. Life in Aboriginal Australia continued undisturbed for countless generations. That was until the early 17th century, when the arrival of Europeans changed their world forever. During the Age of Discovery, many Europeans set out to explore unknown regions, mapping the globe and establishing trade routes. In 1606, a Dutch vessel, captained by Willem Janszoon, made the first documented European landfall on the Australian coast. Over the following decades, Dutch explorers continued to chart parts of the Australian coastline. However, they ultimately abandoned further exploration, finding the remote land uninviting and less economically attractive than the spice-rich islands of Indonesia. It wasn't until the 18th century that British explorer Captain James Cook reignited European interest in Australia with his extensive explorations, setting the stage for future British settlement. In 1788, the British First Fleet, carrying convicts and officials, arrived in Australia, establishing the first European settlement at Sydney Cove. Over the next few years, more fleets brought convicts to Australia, with New South Wales becoming a central hub of the penal colony. Life was grueling for these early settlers. The convicts endured hard labor in the harsh Australian environment, often under strict supervision. Some were able to transition into free citizens after serving their sentences, helping to build the colony. Meanwhile, the Indigenous Aboriginal peoples suffered greatly as they faced European diseases, loss of land, and cultural disruptions. As New South Wales grew, free settlers began arriving, seeking opportunities in the new land. By the mid-19th century, Australia's population had grown significantly, with penal transportation gradually ending in the 1860s. The colony's success inspired the British to establish additional settlements across Australia, leading to the formation of the modern nation. During the mid-19th century, a significant discovery changed Australia forever: the discovery of gold. In 1851, Edward Hargreaves found gold in New South Wales, sparking a massive gold rush that drew people from all over the world. In just a decade, Australia's population nearly tripled, attracting fortune seekers from Britain, America, and even China. This influx of diverse people led to a rapidly growing population and booming economy, forever shaping the nation's development. The gold rush wasn't without challenges. Many who didn't strike it rich found themselves struggling, often frustrated with heavy taxes imposed by the colonial government. Tensions rose, eventually leading to the Eureka Rebellion in 1854, a miners' protest that symbolized Australia's spirit of fairness and equality. Although the rebellion was suppressed, it became a defining moment in Australian history, fostering a sense of democracy and unity. The gold rush paved the way for a wave of urban development. By the late 19th century, towns and cities sprang up, railways connected distant areas, and Australia transformed from a series of colonies into a vibrant and growing society. By the 1890s, Australia was moving towards self-governance, with each colony developing its own identity. Economic hardship struck as the country fell into a depression, causing widespread unemployment, labor strikes, and the rise of trade unions. These issues strengthened Australians' push for a fairer and more democratic society. As the 20th century approached, the colonies sought unity. In 1901, they joined together to form the Commonwealth of Australia, marking Australia's path to independence from British rule. One of the first acts passed by the new Australian Parliament was the White Australia policy, aimed at limiting non-European immigration, a policy reflecting the mindset of the time, but later recognized as discriminatory and damaging. The outbreak of World War I soon tested the young nation's strength. Australia joined the conflict alongside Britain, and its soldiers, known as the Anzacs, Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, were sent to battle in far-off lands like Gallipoli. The war's heavy toll on Australian soldiers became a defining moment in the nation's identity, symbolizing bravery, resilience, and sacrifice. The interwar years were a period of growth and innovation for Australia, despite the challenges of the Great Depression. Iconic institutions emerged during this time, like the airline Qantas, which would later become the national carrier. Australian sports heroes like cricketer Don Bradman also rose to prominence, giving Australians a sense of pride and unity. When World War II broke out, Australia again answered Britain's call. This time, the war came closer to home, as Japanese forces bombed Darwin and other northern cities. Australian troops fought across the Pacific, and the alliance with the United States strengthened. After the war, Australia welcomed a wave of European immigrants, ushering in a new era of cultural diversity and economic growth. The post-war years saw rapid modernization. New infrastructure, cultural institutions like the Sydney Opera House, and a focus on Indigenous reconciliation marked Australia's path toward a more inclusive and forward-looking society. By hosting the Olympics in 2000, Australia showcased its progress to the world, highlighting a vibrant and modern nation.